Welcome to the Boswell Virtual Events. It is day 4,177 of Boswell being in business. I am honored to be hosting Susanna Calkins for either the third or fourth time, depending on if you count events that were not in the store. Actually, if you count Murder and Mayhem that we sold books at, maybe more. So anyway, numerous times, too many to count. For her second novel in her Chicago 1920s alcohol swilling prohibition era murdery series, The Fate of a Flapper, the follow-up to Murder Knocks Twice. For this event, we are honored to have her in conversation with the very wonderful mystery writer, local to us and even localer to me because she lives down the block, Erica Ruth Neubauer, whose debut is Murder at Mena House. And I believe I was looking at Chris's text, and he had the second title up, so I think it's official. Murder at, is it Wedgefield Manor? Did I get that right?
Wedgefield.
Wedgefield. I can't read my handwriting. I was like, I'm so excited, I'm going to scribble it. So with that said, let's give them a big hand. Thank you both for coming.
Thank you, Daniel. I feel all like murdery, cocktail-y, so this is good.
Except not drinking a cocktail, Susie.
I'm beery. Well, it's Milwaukee books, so I mean, I feel like, I have to do a hometown, favorite here.
All right.
That or it's what was in my refrigerator without having to go through the trouble of making a gin ricky, which I really do like. Matt, why didn't you do that? I'm yelling at my husband here. Anyway.
Same. I do like a gin ricky as well.
Yeah, well, Erica, what's Fate of the Flapper about again? Let me read the back cover here. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So funny.
Do you want me to do it, Susie?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Oh, actually, that would be awesome. No, it was just this funny thing because, no, really, and see, my husband, the psychologist, will say that's just interference because, I'm working on these other books. And so I was like, oh, yeah, what happened in that one? No, I can do this. So, yeah, it's set in, 1929 Chicago, October, just before the, stock market crash. Is actually during the World Series. So this is a spoiler alert. Cubs may not have won, just letting you know. But they're playing against the Phillies, by the way, or they're not the Phillies at the time, Athletics. So Gina, who has now been working at the Speakeasy for about 8 months. So she's learned, so in the first book, she's kind of learning the tricks of the trade, being a cigarette girl and a cocktail waitress. But in the second book, she's kind of got it down pat, or, she's kind of figured it out, what she needs to be doing. And essentially she gets a call from Nancy, the cop, the next morning, or she gets a call that, that there is one of Nancy's neighbors has been found dead. And in this apartment right near, or this flat right near where Nancy lives, and Nancy wants her to come and take some pictures because Gina is an amateur photographer and has learned in the first book how to actually be a photographer. Because Nancy's trying to get an edge up on the other cops, and she wants, because she doesn't know what has happened. And when Gina comes to take the pictures of this crime scene, or this I should say just the death, she realizes that the woman and her roommate, who's still alive, had actually been at the Speakeasy the night before. And so Gina ends up being kind of brought into this questionable death. What has happened to this woman? Did she commit suicide? Was this, maybe something related to drugs? Was it, alcohol poisoning? Because there's so much terrible alcohol, as I mentioned. So Gina gets pulled into this a little reluctantly into this investigation. So, yes.
So I'm just going to start out with questions. I'm just going to get in it.
Yeah, let's do it.
You usually, because I have talked with you before about your books, you usually like to start each book with an image in your mind. Did you do that for this one? Did you have a specific image that kicked this book off?
Yeah, so The Fate of the Flapper, and thank you, by the way, Daniel, for that nice introduction. That was really nice, and thanks everybody for coming tonight. Appreciate it. I know it was a long, hard commute to get here, so that was definitely nice. Yeah, so, The Fate of the Flapper, for me, while my books do usually, I do think about sort of an image that starts them. This is the second in the series, is Speakeasy Murders, and really what had happened was when I was doing my research, and I read a lot of the Tribune, editions of the Tribune for 1929, I pretty much read every year. The thing that started to like really emerge for me was some things related to massive bombings that were happening in the 20s, in 1929 specifically in Chicago, and I can talk about that more later, but it was by the time you get to October, where my story is set, October 1929, there were all these notices around that there had been like 100 bombings in Chicago this year, which was notable. They had actually started a whole task force about why do we have so many bombings in our city? And so that was one image that sort of forms a backdrop to the novel. And then the other thing was that I did set my book very specifically in October of 1929, because to me, that's the marker of the other cataclysmic event of 29. The first book in the series, Murder Knocks Twice, was set in January, February of 1929. So I don't think this is a huge spoiler, but so that I could bring in, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, which happened in February. To me, that was sort of an anchor. So I guess in some ways it was less about the image than about the anchor, like trying to figure out something that would help me think through. But the stock market crash of October 1929, I knew it had to have such a profound impact that I wanted to weave that in deliberately into my story of what is happening because the stock market doesn't just crash. I mean, it looked like it, but it's actually been, in fluctuation, for like 2 months then. But by October, you can start seeing it, it's getting worse and getting worse. And there's these moments. And I just wanted to kind of capture that as sort of the outside influences that interact with the inside influences of the story.
I think you did a great job. I really liked how you used the characters that were doing investments and whatever to kind of reflect how things were going up and down and really changing before the actual crash.
Well, one of the things that was sort of interesting to me when I was doing this research was who was coming into the stock market. And, it had always been, prior to the end of the 20s, it had been sort of still a sort of genteel thing, people with money, I have to have it to buy stocks. But by the end of the 20s, there were all these other people who really didn't understand the stock market were getting into it. And there was sort of also people we might call thugs and petty criminals that were getting involved. And they were the ones that were actually bringing about the bombings, because some of them, if the stock market went up and down, they'd go and bomb the banker's house, because that was instead of waiting, people understood, other people who played the stock market understood that fluctuations happen. But so it was kind of there's sort of a social aspect to that too as well, which I just thought was really kind of intriguing. And it kind of, those two things were sort of connected together in my mind as well.
For sure. I didn't want to give a ton away about the bombings, but since you already brought them up, let's talk about them. Let's talk about the bombings.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously there's things in the book that I don't want to, overemphasize here. But I do want to just, so to me, I sort of bring them in the beginning, a little bit around, what we might call foreshadowing to kind of let that there's, but to me, it was just more of an interesting thing about other factors that were happening and the impact, that, because it was a skill basically that had been brought back from the Great War, World War I, men who had served in the armies, even 10 years later, this was one of the skills they brought back, was how to make bombs. And, they had all kinds of bombs. And actually it was an interesting thing, researching how you make bombs. And so there was enough that was the materials were just sort of around that people who had any idea, if they had served in the army, especially, they had this knowledge. So it was sort of one of these weird skills that people brought back and were using. And it sort of suggests something of the really problematic lawlessness in Chicago in particular, but, really throughout the country that Prohibition was bringing on. There were so many tensions between, the police and the people and the federal agents, the dries, they called them. Those are the people who were supposed to be monitoring Prohibition. There were so many tensions because, of course, people were skirting. I mean, it's the fun part of Prohibition, right? They're skirting the law. And, but how those were playing out, was pretty intriguing.
for sure. Speaking of tensions, we definitely find out that Gina, your main character Gina, she has some sort of newfound family, like her mother's family that she hadn't been in contact with previously. And we kind of find out that they control the north side.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about those like turf wars? So there's tensions there too.
Yeah, so, one of the things that was really interesting to me was just researching 1920s Chicago. And, I'm a transplant to the area. I don't know how many people are from the Chicago or the Midwest, but I grew up in Philadelphia, and, where Prohibition happened, of course, but it wasn't as lived there. It's really like, it was all part of the history of Philadelphia, but not in the same way that it's a history of Chicago. And to me, one of the things that when I was researching this was just really how the gangs across Chicago really did start to divide up the city. And that had been happening since, probably the late 19th century, early 20th century. There were these different gangs, like you have the, particularly like the North Side Irish, different gangs there. They're not all under the same leaders, and then you had more South Side, West Side Italian families, and, coming over with, what we would call mafia ties and things like that out of Sicily and Italy. And, and they were bringing these sort of relationships that we might call, illegal with them. And that had been happening from the late 19th century all the way through the 20th century. And so Chicago was increasingly becoming this sort of contested gang territory with some of the gangs like the O'Banions in the north, and Capone's and others, were sort of starting to take over. There's sort of a facetious map from 1931 that shows the Chicago gangs, the gangs of Chicago. I can't remember. It's sarcastic, but it's also like you can see O'Banion territory and the Capone territory, and it breaks the whole city up. But the reason I picked the West Side, by the way, the near West Side, which is where University of Illinois Chicago has its campus, I picked that area because it was not yet under that contested part of the city. I mean, it was like a little bit of a free zone there, where there were small pockets of gangs that were starting to control territory, but they didn't yet have that reach. So that's why, one, I put that, why I put my speakeasy there. So my Senora, who is the owner of the speakeasy, is able to kind of control her area, and I didn't have to worry about real gangs in there. But where they, so what we sort of learn in book 2 is that Gina's family, she has sort of an Italian side and an Irish side, and the Irish side comes out of the north part of north side of Chicago. And yes, they seem to have some ties. I will say that I originally, in the original version of this book, I had more specifics around some of the gangs, but my editor asked me to minimize, because they thought it was just a little bit too much local reference. I mean, of course, as a historian, I'm like, but this is authentic. But then I thought, but that also may save my life, to not imply that, some families may have had illicit ties, and maybe I shouldn't actually name them so clearly in my book. I mean, I'm just saying. I mean, not that I'm afraid of anything now, but yeah, so I wanted that to be sort of a backstory, and for me, it was also around the tensions that these gangs had, as they're controlling. And, I don't know if you're going to ask me about the alcohol trade and how it flowed through the city, but I can mention that.
That is on my list of questions.
We'll check that one off. Because one of the things that's really interesting as part of this contested, obviously it's how the flow of alcohol goes through the city. And it comes in from very different points, and it's, it depends on what kind of access, from the South Side. They had sort of grains that come out of, some of the Midwest states, but the North Side had access to better alcohol that came in basically from the Caribbean and through Michigan and across Lake Michigan. So both Milwaukee and Chicago and northern parts of Chicago had better alcohol. But there was all this who got the material, who got transported, just depended on what part of the city, the access points, different kinds of alcohol. And then so what gangs got to control them, that helped make some of them bigger and stronger because of the different kinds of alcohol that were being transmitted. I could just talk about all the gang stuff all day, because it was just so fun, looking at how they even, they think about these things. I mean, really, okay, I have to say one more thing about that, because it's just so fascinating to me. I'm actually a medieval early modern historian by training, so one of the things about then was pre-industrial revolution, there was what we call a cottage industry, where a family might get the materials for a trade, like textiles, and then they would put them together and they would make a shirt or a dress or something. And that was back then. But in Chicago, you know, these gangs would come by to these families, and they would bring them all the elements to make, you know, some really terrible grain alcohol, gin, you know, what we call bathtub gin. And the families would, you know, make them, you know, in their stills and literally in their kitchens, and they'd have all the materials. And then, you know, a week later, the gang members would come by, pick up the, you know, the jugs of gin, and then drop off new materials, and the whole family, like the grandmothers and everybody's just making this gin together. So it's a really fascinating cottage industry that emerged around the alcohol trade. All illegal, of course. But yeah.
So often when I think about bootleggers and prohibition, I think about like underground tunnels and like smuggling booze through there. I mean, was that happening in Chicago?
Yeah, I mean, so that's one of the, you know, so it's so many interesting things about Chicago. And, you know, by the way, I see in the chat, there's been some comments about, you know, the types of, you know, people saying, oh, I still have this, you know, my family had this happen. And, you know, it's so lived now, you know, people can remember, or their family members can remember, like being a bootlegger or doing something, or going to, you know, some speakeasy, which is awesome. Very lived history. But yeah, Chicago actually, as I found out, is one of the cities with the most amount of tunnels in the United States. I just was like, what? I did not know this either. And I mean, I guess if you're familiar with Chicago, you may know that there's quite a lot of walkways and things like that. But yeah, throughout the 19th century, you know, as they were developing, like, you know, as industry was developing and train routes were, you know, cargo was being shipped more into, as Chicago was emerging as a major city throughout the 19th century, these tunnels were mostly access tunnels and tunnels to like bring, you know, equipment and cargo and things like that, and shipping, sewage tunnels too. And so there's quite a lot of them. And, you know, on the west side where I set my book, there were quite a few. Many of those, they're not as, a lot of them got removed once they started, you know, building highways and, you know, putting in infrastructure. University of Illinois, Chicago, a lot of those tunnels are gone now. You know, they had to put buildings in and all that. But yeah, and so that, yeah, it was quite, so I had to put them in, which is the other reason I picked that area. It's a historian's dream. It's terrible for the community, by the way, where they put University of Illinois, Chicago, because they basically disrupted the communities, you know, the Italian, you know, the other Eastern European communities of immigrants, basically, that were living there, and immigrants in their, you know, second generation families. And, you know, they removed them all, which is terrible when they built the college in the 1960s. But as a historian, it's awfully convenient to be able to like put my speakeasy where I want it to be and where my tunnels need to be. But yeah, so I build the tunnels into my stories, because I felt that's just so fascinating, because, you know, they have to be able to get the alcohol in. And in my book, I do bring in a couple different ways they bring in the alcohol, because I think that's just so fascinating to me, how people hid it in kind of plain sight. But they also had tunnels where they would bring in, like, you know, the big barrels and things like that.
Right. I guess I also want to talk about Gina's cousin Nancy has a bigger role, I think, in this book. Is she based on anyone historical?
Yeah, so Nancy is Gina's cousin, and she's introduced in the first book, Murder Knocks Twice, and as you say, she has a bigger role. She is a police officer. I mean, maybe not an officer, what we call her, just a female cop, policewoman. And she's based on I would say a conglomeration of several female policewomen, or police cops at the time, and across the country. Actually, Chicago was the first police force to have women, and they were actually also the first to have Black woman to be a policewoman in the country. And this was all happening in the 1910s, 1920s. I mean, the very first ones were late 19th century. But yeah, you know, I did a lot of research on them, and you know, they carried guns, and they got training, and they knew all kinds of things. I mean, originally they were also often used, like police matrons police matrons were often used to like guard criminals, but like female criminals, prisoners, I should say, or accused individuals. But the cops actually had they had a little bit more responsibility. And the one that I really based mine on was Alice Clemens, who was one of the first female detective. So she became a detective as well, which was pretty unheard of, just generally. So she was able to actually track down criminals. She wasn't just on a beat. But it was interesting, these female cops, I didn't really put this in the book so much, but they were often used in like ways to like lure criminals or would-be criminals like into positions where they could be trapped by other cops. It was sort of an interesting way that they were sort of enticing people. I don't know, we might call some of it entrapment, I think, but it was a very interesting way that, I think at the very beginning they were trying to figure out how to use female cops. But my Nancy is a little different. I have her as like not quite that good at what she does, and so she's trying but she sees other people are getting promoted and they're getting cases, and I wanted her to be someone that could try to improve herself, and so she needs Gina to kind of help her out a little bit. She's taking training as a you can be a detective, one of these courses that were offered, correspondence courses offered by Sears and Roebuck, or Sears at the time. It's like Amazon, you could buy a course, and take it, but it was, they were going back and forth, and she was getting her assignments graded. And I just thought this was really interesting. I would like to become a cop that way. But she's trying to improve herself. But I thought it's an interesting, and I wanted it to be a female. I didn't want it to be like another story with a male cop, taking the lead. I wanted the female cop to have some role here, some agency.
And I know she wants to become a detective. So like you said, there was precedent for a woman becoming a detective. That might have been a possibility for her. Yeah,
there were a couple. So Alice Clemens was one. I mean, there were a few. They were promoted and they became detectives. And and the distinction, in my understanding, is that they were actually able to pursue criminals and like, look for clues and things like that and do an investigation as opposed to like being on the beat or, look, and I'm talking to an ex-cop. Like, does this make sense to you, Erica, in like the way I'm explaining it? Does that make sense? Is a difference here?
Yes. I think we covered it. Well, we covered that. I do think people like to hear about a writer's process. And I love talking about your process.
Yeah, it makes people crazy. It makes myself a little crazy. It's not, well, one, I've written, I guess I'm working on my 8th book, right? So, because I have 2 series, and I'd say every single one of them, I've had a kind of a different process for, and, generally speaking, I'm not a plotter, so I'm someone that's a little bit more like a pantser, right by the seat of my pants. That got me, I did learn some things though, you'd hope after you write 6, 7, 8 books that you start to learn something to improve. And, my first book, A Murder at Rosamund's Gate, for my first series set in 17th century London, I had written something like 200 pages of this book that I was so interested in the impact of this woman's murder on the community that it really never occurred to me to figure out, who the murderer was. And, I was like, that could be a problem for a whodunit to not know who done it. So after that, because then I had to go back and work it out, and figure that out. And then, after that, I guess my main thing I learned was I need to at least know who is the murderer, who they murdered and why. And then why Lucy is my first heroine, and then Gina is my second one for this current series, why they even need to care. Like because they're amateur sleuths, they're not cops, and that's not a role that's been assigned to them to suss out who murdered somebody. It's just, they happen to both be in these roles. I needed to have it mean something. So my writing process, and people just love my math. So, and Erica and I share the same math. We found this out, which is great. We have our own new math. So basically, so when I'm starting a book, I'm like, well, if I can get to 5,000 pages, 5,000 pages would be crazy. 5,000 words, I feel like that's pretty good. Once I get to 10,000 words, I feel like that's about a quarter of the way through the book, because the book is 80,000 words, so you bear with me. And I feel like right now in my current work in progress, I'm at 32,000 words, which is pretty much almost 40,000 words. And that's double that. Then it's 80,000. I'm pretty much done. So, it makes me feel real good about myself. So just, if you follow that math, that's how I do it. But I see some other writers in here like Michelle and Patricia, and, people sort of nodding like, yeah, sure, whatever you say.
I think you and I both write the same way though, that we both write like a short first draft.
Mhm.
and then
Yeah.
go back in and layer in detail and character development and other things.
Yeah, that's definitely what I do. I mean, I'll work it out, so sometimes I guess I am sort of working out plot. I'm thinking about subplots too, romantic plots, family subplots, things like that. But I'm also, then I go through and, the first draft through, I'm kind of like, add more explanation here, add more, add a fun word, here, that kind of thing. How many times can I use the word zozzled and, get spliffy? I probably should switch that out for, my slang. But yeah, basically and, as I joke about this most recent book, the last 2 books I've written by like throwing words in the air and catching them on pages. So, whatever you call that, that's my other option. That's what I also like to do. And you do the same thing. So, hey, you know what? It gets the book written. Something is written. There are pages. And
It does.
So,
You know?
And I will say, by the way, that I do have a day job. So I'm not someone that like has that, like, I'm going to sit down and write X amount of words a day. I just can't. I'm more like, man, I wrote like a paragraph today. I feel awesome about that. And I just like let myself feel awesome when I have written like 3 sentences, and I don't make myself feel bad if I have not written. But I do tend to write more on the weekends. I'm happy to get, if people want to put questions in the chat too, to Erica, I'm happy if you guys have questions too. But yeah, so it's been the same process. You're right. You're on book 2, although you've written all of your books already. Erica's amazing. She has her 3-book series. She's written them all. She's working on her next series. How do you do it?
Yeah. Yeah. I do need to look at book 3. It's due in a month. Oh, Judith has a question. She says, have you had the same agent for all your books?
I have. So I'm very lucky. I have David Hale Smith of Inkwell Management. And yeah, David, I mean, I can tell the quick version of how David, years ago, gosh, it's been like 10 years now. I mean, almost 10 years. When I was querying my first novel, A Murder at Rosamund's Gate, actually not called that at the time, but I really didn't know anybody that had written a book. I mean, I knew academics who had written like nonfiction, but I knew nobody in this writing community, which is so amazing. And so when I was just reading books about writing and publishing, and they said, connect with people that you might know. And I thought, gosh, I did have a friend in grad school, in college, that had written some crime fiction. So I reached out to him, and he said, I'll give you the name of 2 agents. You can at least, try to get your name in, and maybe they'll look at it if they see my, and they both, I did that, and they both gave me nice feedback, but they both turned me down. David was one of those, and he turned me down. David, a week later, said, if anything ever changes, let me know. I mean, I kind of know now that he may have forgotten that he emailed me already, but it doesn't matter. I thought, wow, that's so awesome. Maybe something will change. And then, we kept querying, and I finally said, I'm going to start working on another book, which actually became the first of that series, Murder Knocks Twice version of that ended up. So I started working on this other book entirely set in Chicago, Prohibition era. And I didn't really think anything of that. But then, I was talking to my husband one day. We were coming home, Matt Kelly, who's on this call now. We were on our way home from a trip, and I said, that first book wasn't so bad. Maybe I should try again. And he said, oh, I've been querying using your query letter, and you have it out with it's out with several folds. They're out with publishers, and blah 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 blah. And then I ended up getting an offer with a press that I didn't go with, but I got really worried about not having an agent. So I emailed back David, my favorite email ever. It was like, it was basically like, book offer in hand, will you represent me? And, like a half an hour later, he said, well, tell me all about it. And then I ended up getting the current contract that I have. So, it was one of those things. It took me a lot upfront, but it was fairly quick once I got the agent as well. So yes, and David has been great. So yes, he's negotiated a number of contracts for me now.
And can you talk about the book that you're writing right now?
Yeah, so let's see. So yeah, so the book I have a book coming out in February. That's my 5th Lucy Campion. So that was picked up by Severn House. That's called The Sign of the Gallows. Yeah, it's set in 17th century London, and it's all kinds of stuff with the gallows in there. I don't know how much I should go into that. And then I'm working on the 6th in that series that's coming out in February of 2020. 22. So yeah, so those are kind of the what I have in the queue, I guess.
Awesome.
So, yeah. Yeah, and what about you, Erica? What's your next book? I mean, he mentioned it, but tell us about that. Tell us about Mena House too.
Well, Murder at the Mena House is set in 1926 Egypt. My protagonist, Jane Wonderly, is traveling with her wealthy aunt. Her aunt really wants to get to escape prohibition, and so Jane gets embroiled in a murder of a young socialite and has to clear her name. And then from there, she and her Aunt Millie travel to England. So the second is a Manor House mystery set in England, and it's Death at Wedgefield Manor, and that is coming out in March.
Yeah, that'll be exciting. I'm looking forward to that.
Thanks.
Escaping the prohibition, though, this is the fun part. But I get it. Just come back for the cocktails. Because they can't really have the same kind of cocktails. Like they're not all dirty and gross. Because there's like, in Europe, they're all like, we only use fancy alcohol.
Yeah, like the good stuff, like the real stuff.
Well, there's actually there's actually wars going on. I mean, like there's real wars going on in Europe at this time, obviously. But I'll just say like there's wars around alcohol because they're so, especially like France, as you might imagine, and Italy, that have, such strong connections to the wine trade, that they were very concerned throughout the 20s and the 30s that, they were going to be like ruined by American cocktails, which everybody's like, gin, gross, like, or like, so disgusting.
Yeah.
I saw that Michelle had a contact, Matt, that's my husband saying, I've read them because he's my beta reader. So he reads, yes, he's read everything. Oh, and he read your books though, Erica, as well. So
bless you, Matt Kelly.
Michelle, I do not have a film agent, although my David does handle film rights. I did have a few, close calls, I guess you might say, where some companies were interested in optioning the, probably the first book, but I never got, that never happened. There's no magic there. It didn't happen. Yeah, so my agent does have film rights people as well. Yes, our elusive dream for many of us who are writers, Michelle maybe as well. Michelle writes awesome books set in 1930s Chicago too. I don't know what alcohol you put in them. I can't remember offhand, but your protagonist is a taxi dancer. Is that what that's the right word, right? Yeah, so she's someone who used to do, I don't know how to call it, but like they would dance for dimes or dance for money with people in speakeasies and places like that. Okay.
Yeah.
Her books are awesome. Let's see. So
why did you pick Chicago for the second series?
Yeah, so I picked Chicago, partly because, hey, I live here now, I'm in the Chicagoland area, and, but it really was right away. I saw like just how lived, Prohibition history is. I mean, I was joking earlier because I saw it in, it's great in the chat, but people giving these comments, but it was, once I got here, it was like, that's the thing. Prohibition is really still here. I mean, when I was I was doing book events for the other books and I was thinking about writing something for Chicago, and people just get so excited. Everybody's like, my grandmother was a rum runner off of Lake Michigan, or, or like, what do we have in here? Yeah. Someone says, my house, yeah, what's that one Hawthorne saying? We had illegal goods for Capone, right? See, I mean, everybody's got these awesome stories about how they although I haven't met too many people who said, yes, my grandmother was a fervent temperance person and hated alcohol, but there were plenty of them too. But and I knew I met one friend of mine, she has a ring from her husband it's this fancy, fabulous ring, like a ruby or garnet. And it was on the hand of someone who was gunned down. But the ring is fantastic and it looks great. And I thought, oh man, what a great story that one is. I mean, so to me, it's just interesting, like how prevalent it is still in Chicago. I think Milwaukee a little bit, Chicago in particular. Although Milwaukee, I think the fun thing was that the bars or the breweries changed to, they pretended they weren't still in business. And, you have like Yingling Brewery in Pennsylvania that switched over to ice cream for a while. And that was a really common thing.
Yeah.
Let's see, I see some chat questions. I don't know if you want to monitor that, Erica, but
I'm on it. It says, what is the most surprising thing you discovered in your research that you included in your book, but maybe didn't originally intend to?
I do try to, like, when I find fun facts, I really, really try hard to put them in. And some of them did take me a while. I couldn't get them all in the first book. So the second book, I have a little bit more of the, like the way people hid alcohol. Like, I just found this really interesting to me, like, that there were like, they would have like collapsible stirrers. Like, I mean, they would basically have like, it wasn't collapsible cups, but they would have like these little, all the equipment that you need to like make a nice little cocktail, and not just gin, flasks, but they had like hidden pockets. There's these great stories of like women wearing under their clothes, even in those slim fitting clothes, like on their inner legs, their thighs, they were carrying like flasks. Like, this is awesome. And then the other thing I found so fascinating, and I think I put this in the book because I love this, it's ridiculous, but that people started having, could buy chemistry testing kits where, when you go to a party or, a speakeasy, you could just test the alcohol yourself to let you know if it was palatable. Because in 1927, the government changed the components of different kinds of alcohol that were supposed to only be used for like cleaning and things like that. But it could be up until 1927, people could, I can't know all about chemistry, I can't remember it, but they could change it back to denature the alcohol so that it was palatable. But then in 1927, the US government changed that formula so people could no longer switch it back to something palatable. And then there were massive deaths. Thousands and thousands of people died throughout the last part of the Prohibition. I think it was sort of just murder on the part of the US government, quite frankly. But they were kind of like, hey, they're drinking it, it's not my problem. But anyway, these tests, and people would carry these little kits around with them to like test your alcohol before you drank it, to make sure it was actually palatable, which I found pretty fascinating. So that was Jill's question. Thanks, Jill. It was a good question.
I remember you have another really interesting piece of research that you came upon about, was it the horse hooves?
Horse hoops. Can't remember. Horse hoops.
I'll come back to it.
Yeah, probably. There was definitely some things where there was a research where they were wearing like shoes that had like, hoofs. Is that the word you were saying?
Yeah.
I thought you said hoop. I thought you said hoop. And I was like, hoops. Hooves. Okay, so those things, hooves on the bottom of cows and stuff.
Yes.
So people had those they had them underneath their boots, so that they could walk through mud and they would leave hoof prints. Hoof prints. So, but really what they were carrying like barrels of alcohol under each arm, while they're walking through. So, there's nothing to see here except for us cows walking down this pasture. It's certainly not people who are illicitly carrying barrels of alcohol through the country fields. So yeah, hooves, not hoops.
That was one of my favorite details that you came across.
Yeah, I think it's just fun, right? Like how they, what people did. Yeah, there's so many. Well, and I don't think this is not spoiler because it's the beginning of the book. I had to work it in, but how they brought in alcohol through, just a regular delivery van. But then there were, there's these great pictures of it looking like there's a front. It looks like it's got all these books or, boxes in there, but actually you open it up. It's like a, one of these concealing doors, and actually behind it, they're in the trucks themselves, or in the wheel rims, there were more things hidden. There's secret bottoms in the crates underneath, like pharmacy, like supplies, like soaps and oils, that would sort of be on the surface, but if you go down far enough, then there's the hidden layers of alcohol. And I just found that just so interesting how creative and innovative people were, which is just so fun.
You also did a great job with the slang. Where did you find all of that?
Yeah, I did. So some of the slang, thank you, by the way. Some of the slang came, there's books on slang. I mean, I have like one, Everyday Speech in the Prohibition Era, which is just what a great resource. But actually, the newspapers, slang was such an absurd language that, I mean, there had always been slang, different groups always have had their own lingo. But in the 1920s, coming out of the Great War, where everything was just very absurd, after the Great War, it's just like the absurdity movements, this is just where we get Dadaism and all these things. slang became a very specific way for the younger generation to keep the older generation from knowing what they were talking about. Like, it was very deliberate, because the younger generation, the lost generation, as they were called, they were so furious at the older generation just for sending, you know, their brothers and, you know, lovers to war, and, you know, all the damage that they came back with, you know, after gas masks and, you know, all the things. And so there was so much slang. But what was interesting is there's these researchers who are going around who are like listening to people. And, you know, it's kind of like Henry Higgins, you know, if you remember, you know, My Fair Lady, like, but there's people going around and like listening to, like, you know, people in these, you know, in different shops and settings, and just like writing them down, and then like writing down what they think the words mean. And then the newspaper printed these all up. It was like, here's how to translate what your teenager's saying, you know, basically. And they were just like so there's so much in the newspapers throughout the 1920s of like, here's how to understand. So it's actually really great. It was just all this slang dictionaries. There were actually huge amounts of dictionaries that were put out. And then they started by the mid 1920s, there were dictionaries in all these fields, like the movie, you know, in movies and entertainment, and they just were putting out their own dictionaries, because there was a lot of change in language throughout the 1920s. But it's also the time when we get a lot of the language associated with dating, because dating is first really happening. Before that, you know, people would woo and court, and, you know, but they weren't dating. But in the 1920s, this is where we get like blind dates and necking. You know, this is like the language that came out. We don't keep petting parlors for movie theaters anymore, but that was like another one that came out. Yeah, that's what the movie theaters were called. Yeah, petting parlor. But yeah, so a lot of the language of dating came out in the 1920s because it was all brand new.
Interesting.
Yeah, so newspapers actually quite a lot of it, and like books, but you know, but that's the fun part.
Sure. Does anybody have any other questions? Oh, yeah, here we go. You obviously do so much research for your characters, Chris Lee says. Who's your favorite character in the new book that you haven't talked about?
That's a good question. You know, we always like, oh, we can't love one character more than other characters. But you know, there's a couple characters that I feel like, you know, if I got a chance to, there would be, you know, more opportunities to develop them more. But I have one person, Benny, who works for the pharmacist, Mr. Rosenstein, and Benny is a young Black man, and I have that he ends up working for the pharmacist in the first book, and he is actually, I wanted him to be someone who is sort of studying to be a doctor. There's very few African-American doctors at the time, and I wanted him to be someone who is looking at Howard to go there. And you know, I have a set of reasons why. This is actually partly because I've taught for many years the history and philosophy of higher education, and it was really interesting to me to see like how young Black men there were these whole examples of them like wanting to be doctors, and you know, and how they got their training. And I kind of wanted to just build that in, and I thought it made sense that he would be a pharmacist, you know, that he might have some connections there. Thanks, Daniel. Daniel likes Benny too, and Matt does too. But yeah, so I mean, there's characters. I like to bring in hopefully some backstory of some of the other ones a little bit more fully in future books as well. I don't know yet, Jill. I saw that question was on here. I don't know yet. I don't have a contract for that. I've written, well, you know, I'm like done the book. No, I've written like 30,000 words of book 3. But I put it on pause to work on the contracted books that I have, you know, books that have contracts. I had to prioritize them right now. Yeah.
Well, fingers crossed.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I don't know. So
that's all the questions.
Yeah, that's great. No, I appreciate it. Thank you, Erica. And yeah, I feel like you should talk a little bit more about yours. Anything else you want to add on?
No. Exactly, Daniel. If you want to see book 3, buy book 2.
Oh, nice, thanks. That's good.
The next Erica book is set in England, and then book 3 is set on a transatlantic cruise.
fun. I know we're also jealous of Erica taking an actual cruise on was it Queen Mary 2 last year,
Yeah.
which is kind of, it's like, I feel like I need to like make a case for like doing research on a cruise.
Listen, you just gotta set a book on one.
I know, like that just sounds awesome. Why didn't I do that? But anyway, although I did go to some places around Chicago and kind of, I didn't go to speakeasies, obviously. Well, I guess my Green Mill, but I did go to some places around where the speakeasy at, and I kind of like sat there and imagined like, gee, you know, had like my slang spilling out of my mouth as I was writing. Well, you know, gosh, I appreciate people coming. Yeah, this book, thank you so much, came out in August, and yeah, the next in that series, Lucy Campion, is coming out in February.
Okay, I have a couple of things to say. First of all, the two of you are both writing women, really great women heroines in the 1920s who are probably similar in age. So when are we going to get the crossover book?
I know, that would be so hilarious. So let's see, Gina in 1929 is, I think I have around 26. And how old's Jane, by the way? Not that they have to be the same age. I'm just trying
No, in 1926, Jane is 32.
Okay, so so I can't go. Well, I guess I can have her meeting them earlier. So yes, so she has to come because Gina's not going to be traveling to England, and she's not traveling to Egypt. So they have to come to her. In
Oh
Chicago.
no, Jane has to go to Chicago.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
Gina's got no money. So I'm just letting you know she's got no money.
Yeah.
But yes, so when Jane comes, they can. Will Jane come to the speakeasy? She'll come and hang out, right? Yeah. So good. All right. So we got that worked out. And then they're going to cause some problems.
Yeah. We're going to co-write this, Susie.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
It could just be a short story.
yeah,
you know?
exactly.
So that was what I was thinking of as I read this. The other thing I was thinking about in terms of crossover is, you know, I read a lot of Renee Rosen's books, which are all set in Chicago. And it's so interesting. She writes historical fiction, you write mysteries, and yet your characters have so much in common in that they are like trying to make it through the world, but they're always, oh my gosh.
just like letting you know.
when she has that photography thing, it so reminded me of the songwriter, like the woman who's the secretary who wants to be the songwriter, and how they have to kind of, and in the last book, the young woman who wants to be, her friend wants to be an architect. She wants to be a photographer, actually. And so they're like trying to kind of continuously break through these glass ceilings to kind of find their calling. And I just, you know, it's so interesting that your books sort of play off of each other in that way.
Yeah, no, yeah, thanks, Daniel. I think that's a good observation. And, you know, I see that in Erica's books too. I mean, I actually am a women's historian by training. And so to me, like, it's always been really important that, you know, the women in my books have agency, but not so much that it isn't authentic, you know, that they're able to navigate their space, and, you know, they are kind of placed in these strictures in society. They're trying to maybe keep women in a certain place, or expectations for women. And, you know, for me, and I think for Erica too, you know, we're trying to help them navigate some of these strictures in ways that are authentic, that aren't just like, you know, hey, I'm Superwoman, I can do anything, but they are always working under these constraints of what they can and can't do. And I feel like that's how they get agency to be able to pursue it. But I have to always think about that, because, you know, it's like, yeah, I can't just give them a 2020 perspective, you know, because that's very ahistorical. So to me, it is trying to figure out what could women do at this time. And, you know, same as Nancy, my cop, you know, I wanted her to like, not be stuck and not, you know, just being told what she has to do or what she's trying to break out of. And other women did. And there's real examples of women doing that. So that's why I just wanted to give them some agency. And maybe
you did a great job.
Thank you. Awesome.
Can I say one more thing that's really interesting is, like, I was mentioning Danny Gardner's book, A Spoon Coon, which we're hosting in a couple of weeks. And that book is actually set on the west side of Chicago in the 1950s, and is about the gangs that were involved in trying to put together the land for University of Illinois Chicago.
Oh, yeah, that's real. Oh, gosh, I have to read Danny's book. I mean, that's really interesting. I mean, and, you know, the culture wars that were going on, you know, that had already been preceding that. But that's really, oh, yeah, I mean, I mean, there's no doubt about it. That was very deliberate on the part of the, Irish Chicago mayor to put that, campus in the middle of an Italian neighborhood. I mean, that was winning temporarily, some longstanding ethnic clashes that have been going on between, different groups.
So thank you both for a really great evening. Thank everybody in the audience for coming. We wouldn't have a virtual bookstore without you. Hope to see you another event. Hope so.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you again, Danielle and Boswell Books. Appreciate it. And thank you, Erica. And thanks, everybody. Yay. It was so fun to see everybody. It's such a nice, fun, random Tuesday night. I love it.
Random Tuesdays. That's what we're known for.
Yeah, I love it. All right. Thank you again. I appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.